Welcome to Couch Talk. Today we meet an inspirational activist who for the past 30 years has focused her work in advancing the rights of women with physical disabilities.
Hi, my name is Bonnie Brayton, and I'm the National Executive Director of DAWN Canada, the Disabled Women's Network of Canada, and I'm passionate about feminist disability rights and the inclusion of all women with disabilities and deaf women in Canada and around the world.
Bonnie, I'm so happy to have you here today.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the show.
My pleasure. And I am so guilty of a faux pas this morning. Considering the issue that we're about to discuss, I cannot believe that I didn't look into seeing if there was a disabled parking spot somewhere around this location. And you were telling me that this is your reality.
Yeah, and I will say that I think it's important to put this in context, is that it's a small challenge I face every day, but it's a reality, yes. Every day when I go to my office, which is not far from here on Sainte-Thérèse Street, I drive around the corner and I cross my fingers that the one disabled parking spot that's there might be free so I can park there.
Right.
And some days it isn't available, and some days I get parking tickets, and that's just so I can go to my job.
Right.
I mean, that's not economically feasible for anybody normally, and even for our organization, it's challenging because I have to keep picking up the cost of these parking tickets.
Right.
And this is a small thing that has a huge impact because it's limiting people's access to the job market. If you think about it in a sort of a concrete way, it means that people with disabilities are coming into the downtown core here in Montreal and are not able to know that they can just put up their handicap pancarte and park.
Right.
And in other municipalities, this is actually something that's been done, and I'm really disappointed Montreal hasn't done something up to now.
Really?
Yeah, but it's like I said, it's a small example of my challenge. The rates of unemployment of women with disabilities in some parts of Canada is up to 75% unemployment.
75%. Wow.
I'm pretty sure that's higher than any other population.
I'm pretty sure it is. That's huge. And you were telling me it's also the biggest minority in the world.
Yeah, the World Health Organization released a report in 2010, and they had done quite a deep study on world population. And one of the things that came out of that report was that the largest minority group in the world are people with disabilities. And because women are the majority of people with disabilities, they are indeed the largest minority group in the world.
Right.
That's an invisible kind of big number, because that number is around something that's not always possible to see because of people with invisible disabilities, but also because when we talk about populations, we talk about where people live, we talk about race, we talk about many different things, but we rarely think about this added layer, which is something else that I think is important to talk about, which is that it's an intersectional understanding of what people are that is required to understand that disability is this big invisible problem.
Right.
Yeah.
It is a bit of an invisible problem. And when we were talking about you being on the show, I was thinking about the cause and women with disabilities. And, I was saying this morning I took the metro and I had a big bag, and just coming up the stairs was just such a pain. And then I thought about that, oh my God, what if I was disabled? How would I even get there? Most of the metros here are not equipped for that. Even in the malls sometimes, and certain stores, most of the stores in Saint Laurent, even on the street, have a few steps to go up, to enter.
It's very true. I was going to say, apparently it would be, there's a really great group here in Montreal called Rapplec, who I believe the projection is 2080 is when we would be looking at possibly having an accessible...
2080?
The year 2080. If this government, if the municipal government was really committed and the provincial government were committed to it, yes. But again, we have 2 super hospitals going up right here in Montreal, And in both cases, the lack of accessibility has already been brought forward to the people who are building these hospitals. Imagine that it will be not possible for somebody to take the metro to Vendôme to go to the new hospital when it's built.
It's a super hospital. It's,
Yeah.
it's supposed to be super.
A super big mistake was made there, which is not too late to fix. If anybody out there who's a politician and has the will wants to do it, it's something I would love Mr. Coderre to address.
Right.
Yes.
Why do you think that this is such a huge oversight in most people's mind? The fact that there is a lack of.
Well, I think one of the things it's important to talk about is that the media in general, other than shows like yours, rarely really drill down into what the day-to-day issues are that people face. And given that 1 in 5 people in Canada is living with a disability, I think one of the first things we have to say is to the media, you need to be telling much more of the stories that people in their daily lives face. I mean, mine was a very small example, but in reality, the highest rates of violence, the highest rates of poverty, again, the highest rates of unemployment belong to people with disabilities, and women with disabilities, in every case, the statistic is that much worse. Mm-hmm. That speaks to huge gaps in terms of policymakers' understanding of what's going on, and it's really, there's a business case to be made for supporting people with disabilities, because people with disabilities want to work and be independent like anyone else.
Right, of course.
One of the things I think is wonderful about here in Quebec is we have, in French, the expression "une personne en situation de handicap."
Okay.
Doesn't translate because we don't use that expression in English, but what it does is speaks to what we're talking about, which is that the person is situated in handicap because of the environment around them.
Okay.
So it's our environment that creates the disability. If I didn't have to deal with that parking issue, it's one less thing that is a barrier to me working. These are the kind of things that, like I said, make sense not only from a human rights perspective, but they make great economic sense, because people with disabilities don't want to be unemployed. They want to be supported and accommodated so they can be employed and have families and enjoy all the same things other people enjoy. But instead, like I said, we're deeply marginalized. The reason I say we're invisible is not because we're not there, but simply because people are not taking the time to reflect on that. Again, it's always presented as this sort of the pity party, or this kind of a charitable notion, when in fact, really what it is, it's just a fundamental human right. Everybody has the right to a job, to a home, to transportation, to all these things. And people who don't face those barriers don't often take time to reflect on who is facing them. I mean, the fact that you thought about that in the Metro this morning is good, because it's the kind of thing we need to challenge more people to do.
Right. And as the executive director of Dawn Canada, it's such a big job to tackle. I mean, it's a huge cause. There's so much to look at, because, like you said, it's not just a parking spot. It's the parking spot. It's the metro. It's housing, even. It's so
having to get
things.
up at 5 o'clock in the morning if you're a woman with a particular disability, so that your attendant can come and help you bathe and dress and so on.
Right.
And having to be ready for the transport adapté to come and make sure that you're ready. And if you're not, then the transport adapté goes away and you're stuck.
Right.
It's different things for different women. I mean, I have a woman on my team who has a visual impairment. So in the winter, when it's time for her to leave, she needs to leave the office by 3:30 or 4 o'clock while there's still good light for her to be able to get safely to the metro.
Okay.
It's many things for many different people. For people with invisible disabilities, it's about feeling safe to disclose that they have a mental health issue, and that it's really important for them to have a quiet room they can go to, or it's really important for them for it to be understood that, when the weather changes and there's a change in light, that they develop more symptoms around, something like seasonal affective disorder, which can profoundly affect somebody's ability to be able to function. But again, it's a very specific issue that can be addressed, can be supported.
How does your organization deal with the range?
Well, a couple of years ago, and I come from the private sector, from a marketing and sales background, and I understand branding. And at the same time, sitting at that desk for about 4 years at that point, I had a pile on my desk, which was, I had this folder, it was sort of my parking lot issues folder.
Okay.
And I was up to about 40 issues at that point, and I was like, me, my small team, we can't do this.
Oh,
There's
my
no,
goodness.
you know, and I mean, again, with 500 million women around the world and millions of women here in Canada and more than 300,000 here in Quebec alone, you know, it's an overwhelming task by itself.
Right.
So
And it's just you guys. You're the only, Dawn Canada is the only organization.
the only national feminist disability organization, one of the few organizations in the world, in fact. And here in Canada, I would say really the only one that's working at a policy and, you know, at that level. There's a great group here in Montreal called Action des Femmes Handicapées de Montréal, which is a really wonderful resource for women with disabilities here in Montreal. And anybody who's interested can contact us and we'll put them in touch with Action. But in terms of Dawn's role, yes, I mean, we're unique in Canada and one of, like I said, you know, a handful of organizations in the world celebrating 30 years coming up in 2015, I'm proud to say.
Awesome.
But so what I ended up having to do was to come up with a strategic plan, and I actually adopted a mantra of leadership, partnership, and networking, and it helped for me to frame how to approach the problem. And so what I've tried to do is identify the highest level issues and to create relationships with stakeholders and partners around the idea that it's about leadership engagement. So, you know, it's not my job to resolve the issue of violence against women with disabilities, but it's certainly, I see my role to facilitate women in transition houses and shelters and in other places that can support women, understanding how to best support women with disabilities. So we have a role to play, I think, in terms of education, in terms of policy and that sort of stuff. But really my message is it's the engagement issue. It's not ours. It belongs to everyone, and particularly to people in positions of power and leadership who could make a difference today.
Right. And how do you recommend people get involved in this issue?
Well, there's lots of different ways that they can get involved. I mean, it starts with thinking about women with disabilities in your community or a woman with a disability close to you on an individual level. And again, you know, not around assuming what somebody needs, but, you know, taking time to understand if there's something you can do to make a difference. I think certainly I would like more people to support our work. Our organization is located at www.dawncanada.net. And again, in terms of support for our organization, I think that's one of the ways they can help, but I certainly wouldn't want people to feel that that's the only way. I think it depends who you are, but if you're in a position of leadership or power, then take a really good hard look at what you do and think about adding the lens of intersectionality, which would be to think about whatever the issue is. You know, for example, for Mr. Coderre here in Montreal, to think about the fact that when he thinks about his community, that he understands that 1 in 5 members of that community live with a disability. And it means that there's a level of service that's not being provided to those citizens that could make a difference not only to them, but to the economic health and the social inclusion of the city of Montreal. There's so many steps everyone can take. The step you're taking in having me on this show is the kind that needs to happen a great deal more. We need to be able to talk to people in wide audiences about the issue.
Right.
I was at a conference, I was invited as a keynote speaker at a conference in British Columbia last week, where I got to speak to 320 people who work in the violence prevention sector. You know, and it was a really, really great opportunity, and I've already had some contact and follow-up. So those kind of things, and positioning the issue in the way that it should be, which is as an urgent, important human rights and economic and fundamental issue.
Right.
You know, 1 in 5, the largest minority group in the world, and nobody knows this, except you and me and your followers.
Well, whenever I do my research for the show and think about who to have on, I'm particularly attracted to issues that I know nothing about. Because I tell myself, if I know nothing about this and I'm like shocked by the information I'm getting, then I feel like it's my duty to learn about it and share it with my network and with whoever is willing to listen, you know? Because like I said, when you told me this and your team gave me some of the numbers, I was baffled. I was absolutely baffled. This is not something you hear on the radio or on the news. You know, even during political campaigns, this is not something that seems to...
Well, I was going to say, I'm going to tell you this, is that for this coming federal election, you know, my focus is completely on the leadership and asking them to, first of all, commit to the poorest citizens of their country, the women who face the highest rates of violence, the highest rates of poverty, because in terms of real leadership, if they don't know that, if they don't know who the largest minority group is, they're going to learn it this year from me,
Right.
because I'm going to make sure they do.
Good. So I feel like we're going to see a lot more of you and a lot more
I hope so.
conferences, and I've been reading a few articles, and everyone's calling you a visionary.
Oh, my.
How do you feel about that?
It's very nice, but like I said, I appreciate it because it brings a focus on the issue. You know, I think I'm just, you know, I mean, in terms of how I even came into this job, I qualified for this job because I'm a woman with a disability. I have a disability too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for me, it's an honor to do what I do. It's getting to get up every day and do something that I love to do, that I know is making a difference, because there are still so much work to do, that every day when we make a little bit of progress,
Right.
it makes a difference. You know, that's a real privilege and a real gift. So I don't say anything except that I'm really grateful that finally there's some attention being put on the issues that are so important, because it is really through a wider awareness and education that we're going to see the change. You know,
Right.
that change has to start with awareness. After that, it's organizations like mine and many other wonderful organizations who work on disability issues across this country need to be supported, and people need to understand that it's just, you know, the difference between you and them is just, and I don't mean this to sound negative, but it's like you can get hit by a car tomorrow and then you're in the same place we are.
Right.
You know, you could end up going through something difficult and having post-traumatic stress be an experience that you live. And then you're one of us too. You know,
Right.
it's such a wide range of things, and it's affecting all people in this country. But people as a whole have to take ownership of this. We need an inclusive Canada, the kind of Canada we can all be proud of.
Right. My goodness, maybe you should get involved in politics yourself. I'm like ready to vote.
no.
Where do I vote? Well, on that wonderful note, thank you so much for sharing this information with me and with everyone else. And it's definitely an eye-opener, and it is everyone's issue. You know, I agree.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, because like I said, it's through the kind of leadership you're showing that we're going to really see a difference. So thank you.
Thank you so
Appreciate it.
much. And thank you to you guys for joining us on another episode of Couch Talk. I hope that this was an eye-opener for you as well. And we will see you next time on another episode of Couch Talk. Thanks.
Wish to see you, wish to see you, many all the colors. Wish to see you, wish to see you, many all the colors.